Welcome, everyone, to our event, The Stories That Become Our History and Heritage. This is the panel discussion following the film screening of The Donut King. And we have here today as our guest Mayly Tao, who is one of the film protagonists. She is the CEO and owner of the Donut Princess, LA, and is owner of DK's Donuts and Bakery, as well as James Tang, TCK, an international actor and filmmaker, and author Irwin Tang, who has authored multiple books, including uh, Asian Texans, Our Histories, Our Lives, and he's the co-author and editor for that book, and is also a licensed therapist. And before we start with our program, I just want to do some land acknowledgements. My name is Myra Demopius, and we're live streaming from San Antonio, which is the land of Yanawana, home to Coauthor, Somisek, Eshtokna, and Tonkawa. And some of our guests are also from Los Angeles, which sits on Chumash, Tongva, and Keech land, and is home to the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians, Wishtoyo Chumash, Gabrielino, also known as Tongva, and the Keech Nation. And I just want to take this time and moment to just acknowledge the amazing panel that we have. Each of our panel members have a unique history of their experience as being Asian American and or Asian in the global diaspora of the Asian identity, and each are doing really amazing things that are unique. With Mayly Tao being an entrepreneur, James Tang being an actor and filmmaker, and being a voice for Asian American representation in media, and Irwin Tang authoring different books, including one where he talked about his experiences as a child of a professor in College Station, where he experienced anti-Asian racism early on. And Mayly Tao is also the host of a podcast, Short and Sweet, where in one episode she talked about Black Lives Matter and how as a child she actually grew up in an environment of racism happening within the Asian community and within the Asian families. And so each one are doing significant things to address anti-Asian racism, especially in this time in history in the US where we're experiencing a lot of attacks still. And in a way, even if it goes down a little bit, it has always been in our country since the beginning of the US Constitution. Um, and I just want to first introduce our guest and the amazing background they come from. Mayly is a Khmer, Thai, and Teochew Chinese Asian American born to Khmer refugee parents who arrived in America to start a new life. Her uncle Ted Ngoy sponsored hundreds of Cambodians to come to America and help them manage and own their own donut shops. She currently owns DK's Donuts and Bakery in Santa Monica, California, and her delivery-only donut bouquet concept, Donut Princess LA. She also is a creator and host of her own podcast, Short and Sweet, a Donut Princess podcast, where she explores mindset, women empowerment, and small business tips. She hopes to elevate Asian American voices and representation and vows to create a legacy for the next generation of Asian Americans. She's launching her new luxury car rental business, Donut Exotics, in this summer 2021. And I'm sorry, Mayly, if I mispronounced anything, please correct me.
It's okay. It's all good. You're doing fine. It's a did you, which is like that small dialect that I'll get into later.
It's interesting. Yes, yeah. Please do. We all can learn from one another. Irwin Tang has written and spoken extensively about Asian Americans and Asian Texans. He's a co-author and editor of Asian Texans, Our Histories and Our Lives. And if you want to add anything to that, Irwin?
Yeah, I've written and published extensively on Asian Americans and gotten involved in some controversial topics, but I've always stood up for Asian Americans and helped to get the Center for Asian American Studies established here at UT Austin, had a public battle with Shaquille O'Neal when he was making racist taunts towards Yao Ming, and that changed sports journalism permanently in the United States. So those are a couple things.
Thank you for all you do, and thank you for the legacy of the Asian American studies. James Tang is an international actor that has spent time living in Thailand, Canada, and Australia. He's trained in Meisner technique, and he most recently worked on an untitled Apple TV production or Apple TV Plus production and has appeared on NBC's Brooklyn Nine-Nine opposite Stephanie Beatriz and Melissa Funero. And other credits include Los Angeles and BOSCH. And I just want to add that if you ever saw his acting reel, and the different work that he's done, even as a filmmaker, I believe that you'll become a James Tang fan. And so I just want to start with Mayly. Mayly, how did it feel to grow up a part of the family that is now identified as a family of the Donut King?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I grew up here in LA, and my parents, they were Cambodian refugees, right? As you guys saw in the film. So they came here not knowing any English. They didn't know, how to do anything, but luckily Uncle Ted was here before us and kind of taught us, like he did with the other families, how to start a business here in America. So growing up, my experience of growing up was very similar to a lot of other immigrant families, where you're the first generation here. I spent a lot of time in the family business, like I said in the film. Started when I was at the age of 6, helping my parents. My dad actually, like, now that I think back, he played this game where it's like, give me change. It's called Gimme. And that was really just to train me to work in the cashier at the shop. So, we spent a lot of our weekends at Costco. I was like in the back of the little orange cart with my dad, just like tagging along, helping him, giving him small like business advice. And, growing up in America, like my parents wanted to give me everything, right? So they sent me to a private Catholic high school. They sent me to UCSD in hopes that I would get, a job that was not as much hard work as, in the donut shop. And my experience of growing up here, I mean, I never really was proud to be Asian because nobody else really looked like me where I grew up. I was the only Asian girl in my high school. I never met another Dichu Cambodian person until I went to college. And even then, within like being Asian, I'll meet a person who's Asian and they'll say, "Oh, you're part Chinese. Like, do you speak Mandarin or Cantonese?" And I'm like, "Neither. I speak Dichu. It's a small village dialect." And even growing up, like just the confusion of my identity, right? Like growing up, there was like nobody on film or TV that really looked like me. There was, Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan, but, they don't look like me. I'm not, there's no powerful Asian women out there representing, who I wanted to be. And, it was just like, I always felt like the other. And even then I was bullied for looking Asian, growing up. Like I would raise my hand and, they would tease me because I would participate in, smart. So then like I kind of hid behind that and tried to kind of like not be so smart and just kind of really, really quiet. And my mom, she's a dragon mom. I know that if you know what a dragon mom is, she's very, very strict with me, overprotective, and, just wanted to make sure I grew up like with this like traditional style of, parenting that she went through, and, just wanted to make sure I had a good opportunity here in America.
Thank you for sharing that, Mayly. And I'm sure, I don't know how many of us actually grew up with dragon moms or dads, but, there's that, like as a mom, right? There's a pressure of, like I've had that speech with my son, like we're not white, so we have to sort of challenge ourselves a little bit more, and I can see how being an Asian entrepreneur can play into that, but it's just interesting, it'd be interesting to see if there's a study out there where it compares the different parenting styles among Asians and see how that influences our career choice. James Tang, Mayly talked about the importance of Asian American representation in media. Do you want to add anything to that? Because I know you've been a staunch advocate for for not only representation, but you've been an international advocate for anti-Asian racism.
Yeah, definitely. I feel there's just I do want to throw out too, though. It's so funny watching this film. Like my family has so many actually parallels because my dad's side is literally Techo Chinese from Thailand.
Cool.
So yeah, and then my grandma also smuggled stuff like across borders. It was like just seeing that. I was like, oh my god. But I grew up in Thailand. Went to international school, and yeah, when it comes to representation, I feel like, Hollywood films always kind of made it out across the world, over the oceans and stuff. And so like being in Thailand, the theaters were basically like Thai films, like local films, and then Hollywood films. And I don't know, there's just this kind of like insidious underlying subconscious effect when like the Hollywood films don't have like any Asian people in them. My dad also kind of had like a movie collection. He really loved movies and audio visual stuff. And like the only people I could kind of see that were up there were like, Jonathan Coquan as Short Round or Data from the Goonies and stuff. And like at the time I was like, I don't want to be like him so much, and I think having that was because like something I kind of resolved to do as a kid, just subconsciously was like, maybe I want to get into movies. I love movies, but my dad watches all these movies. I'd love to, maybe I'll direct because there was this subconscious thing. Part of it was being a bit shy, but another thing was just that like, because there was this lack of representation, I was just like, there's no way I can act. That's just out of the question. Like there's no way I could do that. And I think part of it was that subconscious lack of representation kind of helping just push that decision. So it kind of took a lot of unlearning over the years to be able to be like, no, I think I can do it.
So interesting. I had no idea about that. So it's just interesting that that's a natural connection we made right here, right now. Irwin, do you have anything to add to, your experiences growing up as Asian American?
Well, it brought to mind, how Asians are so concentrated in the entrepreneurial fields, and I think the way that our economy and our society is structured kind of funnels us into that area, into entrepreneurship. Why? I think there's a number of different factors. A lot of the professionals, a lot of the Asians who come here lose all their credentials when they immigrate to the United States. They were doctors. They were these highly trained professionals. Those licenses and degrees don't mean anything a lot of times in the United States. So you see a lot of these professionals end up running gas stations, or even possibly working at a restaurant and stuff like that. And then for other people who were born in the United States, I was talking to the yogurt shop dude, here near my home, and he had his son working there at the shop. His son works there a lot, right? It's an Asian mom and pop family place, and he was like, we're Chinese Vietnamese, we're Chinese from Vietnam, which is really common. A lot of the Asians from Southeast Asia have Chinese blood. And he was telling me, my son applied to Princeton and all these places, and he's going to get in one of these Ivy League schools and stuff. And I'm like, no, he's not. You have to be. He was telling me, he's number 8 in his class and all this stuff, and he's robotics, and he's knows how to do all these things. I'm like, no, you have to be like number 1 in your class if you're Asian. You can't be sort of like a great white student to get into an Ivy League school. You have to be way better than the white people. And he didn't understand that. And I was like, what did he put on his application? Did he put down that he's Vietnamese or Chinese? And he said, well, he put down he's Chinese. And I said, no, you can't put down your Chinese. You have to put down your Vietnamese. because that's another level of discrimination right there. So one of the reasons why so many Asians are funneled into entrepreneurship is because there's a lot of discrimination against us getting into college programs, into graduate school programs, and into jobs. So, you know, I know someone here in Austin who was an engineer, but he's Asian. It's harder to get a job as an engineer. If you're Asian, they're going to hire white people first because of their diversity program, right? And so he's working as a mover and a mounter. He mounts televisions and moves furniture and stuff like that. So he's kind of like his own independent contractor. And I've known a lot of Asians who have ended up having to sort of go on their own because, you know, something happened at their university and, you know, they don't have a job anymore, and it's really hard to get a job, you know, because, you know, the last person hired is Asian or Asian male in certain fields. So I think there's a lot of the sort of the pincher movement there to sort of shove Asians into entrepreneurship.
That's really interesting. And Mayly, the film goes into how the younger generation, you know, the children of parents who are, you know, the owners of shops, the donut shops, that they didn't want to necessarily take on or take over their donut business. Did you experience that? And did you know, it looks like you touched on in the film that you sort of went full circle with coming out of college and not really intending to take on the donut industry, yet today now you're LA's official donut princess. So tell us about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, like every immigrant kid's experience, like, you know, you spend a lot of time working at the shop. Everything's kind of surrounded by this business, which is your livelihood. And especially with the donut business in itself, I mean, we run a 24-hour business. So anything can happen at any time, even when I'm sleeping. You know, the shift that I work is like 5 a.m., you know, getting up really early, dealing with all the small intricacies of a small business, especially related to donuts, which is the perishable good. I mean, it's like communications via email. You get people calling you. There's bigger events. Like there's a lot that has to go on with the donut shop. And it's a lot of hard work, a lot of physical work that you have to go through. And, you know, after I went to college, you know, coming back, there were a few things that brought me back. And first of all, you know, my mom and my brother asked me to come back to help. It was not really my intention to stay that long. I was like, okay, you know what? I'll just do this for the meantime. It'll be fine. But as I started to work with this new, fresh mindset that I had gotten from college, right? So I studied communication. I studied abroad in Italy, which actually really opened my eyes to traveling and culture and food. And coming back now, I was like, you know what? Why can't DK's be this place where people come to when they're in Santa Monica, and really thinking about this new experience culture that we're in now. So it was really a funnel for my creativity while also fulfilling this purpose that I wanted to do in life. You know, after college, I interned for UCSD doing their marketing and PR. I was interning for a news station, you know, in the back of the truck and doing all that. And I just kind of asked myself, like, what for? Like, what is this? What is my life for? Like, is it really dedicated towards a certain value, or am I just trying to like fill the time in? And what really kept me interested was just helping my family. And, you know, my parents, you know, they have an incredible story of how they came here, and this like story of like resilience and perseverance and dedication. And also they went through a lot of traumatic things that I was like, this is easy. Let me just dip my hands in here and figure it out. So as time progressed and as I saw more and more success, and also just like free reign to kind of be as creative as I wanted to, this totally fed that whole creative part of me. And I think that's how it came full circle, no pun intended, per donut, of like why I came back to the shop and, you know, just let this be my world. And I think that I've made a pretty positive impact, not only within my family and friends and community, but just like being this almost role model for people, where like I get messages all the time from people all over the world who are like impressed with the story, impressed with the branding, and it just opens up new channels of connection and opportunities for me.
Yeah, I remember in the film, your mom said she did it right.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting how sometimes it just goes to show some of what of who we are as entrepreneurs is very much intrinsic. Maybe because we do belong in a community where we've always known struggle, because we've always, because of our identity, because of the color of our skin, because of how we look, we sort of were born into a world. And I believe, and I'm going to ask this from James too, I believe it's not only in the US, but in different countries also. Because even if you're in another country, for example, me, I grew up sort of like James in different countries, Europe, Southeast Asia, throughout my childhood. There's a Western dominance even in Asia among the expat community. So, for example, in expat communities, you're expected to speak the language English. But over here, if you're in an international community, you're expected to speak English. So everywhere you're expected to speak English in multicultural settings. So we're born into a world that is Western dominant, that is Caucasian people dominant. And I think that might affect how we sort of maybe have the DNA for how to organize ourselves and how to, become entrepreneurs, whether it's social entrepreneur or business entrepreneur or cultural entrepreneur. James, do you feel that there's something about our identity as Asian Americans that is not only U.S. specific, but can impact our experience in different countries and cultures as well?
Yeah, definitely say so. In that, because yeah, I think being someone that looks Asian but then is in Asia and can't necessarily speak the local language, there's always a bit of like a depending on like who you're with and stuff. And it's I even found myself doing that a little bit as well, even though like technically, I mean, I identify as third culture, so it's like that kind of identity between identities as well. But there's like I'm just thinking of a friend I know out there who is, I think, he's Thai American and then moved to Thailand, and then his Thai might even still be non-existent at this point. And so it's like this kind of, I think, just the simplicity of the human mind. We're just like, oh, okay, this person looks like the locals, and then therefore, oh no, he doesn't behave like the locals. So there's like a little like oh, okay, I got to readjust. Me growing up international and meeting people from everywhere, I can adjust pretty quickly. But depending on who you're with and who you're around and stuff, sometimes people just get frazzled and just cannot like compute that and just kind of like go on their ways. But then there's also family sometimes there's a bit of shaming as well, where it's just like, you're not really Asian, you're not speaking the Asian language. And it's just like, but and then I think it just creates like another level of an identity crisis.
And yeah, I can relate to that as well, because there's certain things I could, like I don't know if I could deliver a whole speech in Tagalog, for example, but I could get by, I can converse. And so there's different layers of our identity. And I think being Asian American, there's sometimes sort of like other third culture kids, it's hard to 100% claim it. But I know that even if I can't 100% claim Asian American, because I didn't grow up only in the US, there's certain, I believe, intrinsic experiences that we all share because we all look Asian. So, for example, I was in a Trader Joe's, and I had asked for marzipan, and I'm used to the word marzipan because it's the German pronunciation of it. But a white man, corrected me, But I have a feeling that if I was white, with a white woman and would have said marzipan, and he said, it's not marzipan, it's marzipan. And I have never heard that in Germany when I used to live there. But, things like that where if I was an Asian, I bet you there would have been less chance that I would have been corrected by a white American. And so there are certain things, I agree with you, James, that there are certain things that are universal, but there are also certain things that are, like within the Asian community that there's an added expectation for you to represent. But I think it also boils down to the idea of identity, on the most part, is still very nationalistic. But at the same time, nationalism is also connected to white nationalism. So it's just interesting. Irwin, I wanted to ask you, with the film theme about Asians getting the donut industry, do we have parallel stories in Texas that the rest of the nation haven't really heard yet?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the story of ethnic business, right? And every Asian ethnic group has its sort of its stranglehold on certain businesses. Am I frozen?
A little bit.
Sometimes.
I think I'm frozen.
We can hear you though. Never mind.
I think he might have some lag on his end, and we'll just oh, here we go.
Am I back?
Oh.
Yes, you're back. We can audibly.
Yeah, I hear nothing on my end.
You're back now, though.
Have I returned?
Yes, you're
Am I
back
now?
Yeah.
How do I turn off the video aspect of this so I can cut down? Okay. Oh, I get it. Here. I'll stop the cam for a second. Still, I won't get frozen so quickly. Yeah. So there are so many sort of businesses that certain ethnic groups tend to dominate. In the 1980s. In Texas, about 17% of all the motels in Texas were owned by people with the last name Patel. And a lot of different business, the Vietnamese tend to dominate the nail business, and it's largely, and the Koreans were also involved with donuts in Texas, along with the Cambodians. And I interviewed one Korean young woman who told me about her price war. Their family's donut price war with a Cambodian family across the street. They each had a donut shop, and they started competing on price, and it just went crazy, But I mean, that's the type of competition that is good for the consumer. But can I talk a little bit about how the Cambodians were bombed and thrown into disarray in large part through American foreign policy, and that is still happening in certain parts of the world.
Yes, especially with what's happening in Palestine right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so basically the United States was almost determined to destroy Cambodia. They started bombing the nation, chasing after Ho Chi Minh and the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and they just killed countless thousands of people that way. Then the CIA overthrew Prince Sihanouk, Norodom Sihanouk, which threw the country into greater disarray. And then then the Khmer Rouge took over, and the Khmer Rouge luckily were overthrown by the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese Communist Liberation Army there. And then even after that, the United States supported rebel organizations on the ground which were associated with the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. I was one of the few people in the late 80s that protested this support of these rebel groups. in College Station of all places, and at the same time there was a Asian here in Cambodia in Austin that was helping to create a peace plan for Cambodia, in which he faxed to the United Nations and publicized, and he actually organized that by having Cambodians from all over the world come to agreement, which is kind of crazy. Having them come to agreement on anything at that point, and the eventual UN peace plan coincidentally matched what they had faxed to the United Nations. It was very, very similar. Fast forward to 2014, and the United States, suffers a terrorist attack in San Bernardino. 14 Americans are killed. The United States decides to reverse their policy in Syria, and to, instead of trying to keep the war sort of limited in Syria, they started bombing Syria and invited the Russians in. By the Russians coming in, it expanded the war tremendously, and the slaughter expanded tremendously. The Americans started supporting Al-Qaeda in Syria, amongst other organizations in Syria. The Free Syrian Army, which included people like Al-Qaeda and so on. It was just a mess, and we hear about the decimation of cities like Hanoi and stuff, but has anyone heard of Raqqa? So we got to a point in the United States where the media was so, you might call it biased or apathetic or whatever, that they just completely ignored the Americans bombing a city into the Stone Age and killing thousands upon thousands of people, not just in Raqqa, but in other places in Syria, and contributing to their complete, I'll call it a genocide in Syria. We really ushered in the Russians to help create that genocide. So where are the Syrian refugees in America? There was no movement, as there was in the United States in the 1970s, to get the Southeast Asians refugees to the United States. There was no similar movement for the Syrian refugees, even though half the country, probably most of the country, is considered refugees at this point. They're either refugees in their own country or they've gone to other nations. And at this point, no one's talking about it, in large part, I think, because there's no room. So many of the refugee facilities, you see these rooms in these ICE facilities in which children are packed like sardines, side by side. So it is a complex issue, and it's not easily solvable. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. And yeah, I would agree that a similar thing is in Gaza, where the United States has been channeling billions upon billions of dollars into the Israeli coffers and into the Israeli military, and at the same time supporting Hamas. Supporting the Palestinian Authority, which is allied with other Palestinian organizations like Hamas. So again, supporting multiple parties within a civil war is just insane. And yet, where are the Palestinian refugees? We have some, but not as many as one would expect, considering there's a giant wall around that country and they're strangling them. So I think this is something for both liberals and conservatives to consider and to think about why, if it was Obama and Biden's war to destroy Syria, why aren't the liberals or the Democrats talking about the refugees, just like Ford and Carter brought up the refugees during the 1970s?
It's really definitely interesting to have further discussions on. I just want to take a little moment. Sophia Lee says, "Hi, Irwin. It's Sophia." She's one of the co-authors of the Cambodian Texans chapter with you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hi, hi, Sophia.
But going back to what you were mentioning, I think anyone as a community with a history that is not yet well known, at least I personally, I also feel that need, or at least a social responsibility to also uplift the stories that are also hidden, because so much of our history has been hidden. There's a effort in Texas right now in the Texas legislation to block efforts to teach on critical race theory in schools. And so we especially in Texas, some of our stories are hidden, and that's why I believe your book, Irwin, is very crucial, and it should even be part of a curriculum uh, of sharing the stories that are unheard and are minimized and are hidden. And in that same vein, we should also keep uplifting stories like what you just mentioned with Syria, and supporting the people of Palestine, because at the very end, regardless of what we each think politically, at the very end of the day, the bombing of 17 hospitals, wiping out the only COVID testing facility in Gaza, has a big impact, and it's at the end of the day, it's a humanitarian issue, just like the refugee situation was a humanitarian issue. Irwin, I don't know if you can expand a little bit more on this, but there was a time in history where majority of the Americans were against refugee resettlement in the U.S., mostly after Vietnam, and how there was a black, an African American caucus that supported refugee resettlement to allow more refugees to settle in the U.S. Uh, do you have anything to say about that?
I didn't know about that caucus. I think it's a complex issue. I think that Black Americans rightly probably feel ambivalent about large numbers of refugees coming to the United States. We ran a restaurant in College Station, Texas, and it was essentially right across the street from one of the poorest Black neighborhoods, and probably in all of Texas. I mean, when I was growing up, I would look at the homes there and I'd be like, how can a person live in a shack like that? This was in the 1970s and 80s. At the same time, we never hired a Black person, and I don't think any of them applied to our restaurant. I think they knew that for a small mom and pop Asian restaurant, you make your relatives work, and then you hire Mexican laborers, pretty much all illegal labor, and you hire Chinese laborers who speak the language that you speak and who are mostly illegal as well. And so there are Black people out there who really support the idea of, let's bring in people who are in need. And at the same time, there are Black people out there who are like, well, what about us? I had my best friend in College Station when I was growing up. He's Black, and he was like, well, why are all the construction workers Mexican? And I was like, I don't know. Why is that? I thought that's weird. It's because it's cheap, well-trained labor. It's like the best workers, a lot of the best workers from Mexico, just like a lot of the best workers from Asia, come to the United States. They're highly trained. They do damn good jobs, just like the Chinese rail workers, the first Asian immigrants. They were the best they were at what they did, and it's really hard to compete against those people. And so and sadly, so you would see the the competition for labor is rough, and yet at the same time you still see extreme upward mobility in the United States, like the ability for a poor person to rise up out of poverty is incredible in the United States still, and the vast majority of people in the United States in every racial group, especially I think Black people, if they were born in poverty, they get out of poverty by the time they're 18 or 25 years old. By the time they're working age type people. So upward, and you see the Mexican laborers. We had a Mexican illegal worker named Pedro, And he started off as the friar. Then he became the assistant chef. And then after we had to close our restaurant because we pretty much never made a profit, after we closed the restaurant, he became the head chef at another Chinese restaurant. He was the head chef cooking Chinese food at another Chinese restaurant. And so the upward mobility was, he was making pretty good money at that point. So
that's really interesting because they touched on that upward mobility in the film, The Donut King, as well, and how it's different in Asia. And when I heard that part, I thought of Philippines and I thought of Malaysia, and I would say, because I was very young at that time, but I would say that I don't remember a lot of stories of from rags to riches. Mayly, you interview a lot of entrepreneurs on your short and sweet podcast. And I just want to thank you for talking about Black Lives Matter. I know that in your podcast you said that you donated a lot of donuts to protesters at that time, and you were very vocal about supporting the protest, not supportive of the looting that was affecting small business owners, but the movement itself, and donating donuts to protesters, and while other people were donating water. And you'll always be part of history in that way. In regards to upward mobility and anything you want to add about solidarity with Black lives, in the same way that Irwin talked about his childhood, and in one of his books, Growing Up Chinese American in College Station, he talked about how when he was being bullied for being an Asian, it was the Black kids that defended him. Mayly, do you want to talk more about your experience with solidarity with Black lives given your childhood, and anything about upward mobility?
Yeah, I mean, well, regarding upward mobility, I think that, again, going back to being did you, right? So being did you, you have to understand that when immigrants move to a whole new country, it's either because they're being forced out or there's not a lot of opportunity. And so my grandparents from the south of China decided to go to Cambodia, and some go to Vietnam or Thailand. And I do have a lot of family in Thailand as well. There's large concentrations of Dichu Chinese people there to find more opportunity. And then they're displaced again, my parents, to go to America because they heard of this, American dream where you can have upward mobility. Oftentimes when I go back to Cambodia, I just feel a sense of gratefulness, just because I think what makes me different than the other kids that were born into the small village of Cambodia, just like my parents were. And if they didn't get this opportunity, I wouldn't have this life here in America with full of opportunities for business, for creativity, for whatever it may be. And I still feel that the American dream is very much alive here. And it just kind of depends on your work ethic, your opportunities, timing, all of that. So that's my comment on upward mobility. And regarding the Black Lives Matter movement, I think that was definitely a time of re-educating for myself. You're not really taught in school about what really goes on for the Black experience. And my personal experience of, having a dragon mom who, she ran multiple businesses. We had the donut shop, we had a Chinese food restaurant, and she had a dollar store where people could come and buy goods. And because of her experiences with not only Black people, I guess being racist towards Asian people, and this comes in the form of, microaggressions. She's been held up by gunpoint by a majority of them are African American. She wanted me to stay away from Black people. And she, as a kid, she would just say, you can't play outside because, a Black person's gonna come and throw you in their truck and kidnap you. These were there's this old traditional way of I guess parenting where you're really parenting out of fear. And even growing up, my grandma, when I would watch TV and BET was on, she's like, why are you watching Black people? And even within our own language of Dichu, there's a word, and it's like basically you're when you're identifying a Black person, it's a Black, it literally translates to Black ghost versus a Black person. So even rooted within language, before even understanding how the world kind of works, that's also apparent in our language. And yeah, I mean, my mom, like I think to her traumatic experiences, and I don't blame her for trying to keep me away from Black people or Black culture, but growing up, there's so many parallels between Asian people and Black people in, you know, being a minority race here in America. And Black people, you know, they fought for a lot of the rights that Asian people got to automatically enjoy just because it was later on in the timeline of being in America. So that's why I felt so compelled to, number one, support the Black Lives Matter movement, whether that be on social media or in person on the ground, like donating at protests and being there. But, you know, the hardest things were having the conversations at home, where I had to tell my mom exactly why I was doing this. And even then she was like, oh, so you're on the side of the Black people. I was like, Mom, like, no, like we're all on the same side. Like, can you, you know, and to explain this to somebody who's hurt, right? She's been hurt before by Black people, and carrying on these stereotypes, it's really just a form of protection. And, you know, in Asian culture, you know, you just want to basically protect. So I think it's, you know, we're moving now into this like new world of thinking, and I'm hoping that, you know, if whoever's watching this out there, that you're able to have these hard conversations at home and really do your research and re-educate. You know, during the Black Lives Matter movement as well, I watched Black films in like, even in film, right? Like there's the depiction of the Black person, but in different ways. And I would highly suggest, you know, if you have these certain, you know, ideas around it, don't be afraid to do your research, to participate. I was brought onto a clubhouse room where I was a panelist and talked about my own experience of it. And by sharing these experiences, you can kind of come to an understanding of, oh, okay, that's why they thought of this, but we're going to change the way we think about it now.
And certainly that topic is very complex. So it is worth the time to, you know, look into other people's stories and other perspectives, because I certainly understand the fear from, you know, being held up at gunpoint. That's very traumatic. But at the same time, there's also a need to be aware of the difference between, for example, state crime, where racism worked against, you know, Black people from places of authority, and crime that comes out of being born poor. You know, there's the criminalization shouldn't be the same, because one abuses authority and the one has no authority, absolutely. And one is, you know, the other is disempowered and has to resort to crime. And so certainly there's a lot more conversations that need to happen around that whole topic, that whole world as well. And back to what you were saying about needing to spend time hearing other people's stories, that very much applies to Palestinians today. I know here in our city, there's going to be a protest to speak out for Palestinian lives, because the atrocities are at a very, very, you know, very much a crisis level, a humanitarian crisis level. Like I said earlier, wherever you are on the political range of where you stand, at the very end of it all, a lot more human lives are being lost among the Palestinian people.
To add to that, also, one of my best friends is Palestinian. So we share a lot of our, not only the gratefulness that we're here, but also the social activism that we can do. So, you know, he's actually shared with me, hey, you know, here's a script that I wrote to call your local senators and representatives and tell them to, you know, not pass this bill that is being discussed right now. So if anybody out there is watching this and needs the senator's number or the script, please like message me. I'm happy to give it to you, so we can actually take action as citizens in America to, you know, not lose all these innocent lives anymore.
And to the TCKs listening out there, around the world, there has been a lot of call for help from the international community. The UN has stepped in, and spoken out for Palestinian lives. And as community members internationally, we can also put pressure. Thank you for sharing that. We can likely share it on our comment section if you have the information handy. You just have to go through comments. There's we're on StreamYard, and there's different threads for different comments. But if anyone wants to share that information on how to help Palestine, you can share it on the thread for this panel. James, and I just want to start, coming to like any final words you all have to share. James, being a TCK, an international actor and filmmaker, is there anything you want to leave the audience with in terms of, why you decided to get into, acting and filmmaking, and the implications of being Asian American in your career for anyone out there considering, the artist industries, either as actor, filmmaker, or other type of artist?
Yeah, I'm a huge champion of representation and a believer in representation and the power it has subconsciously across just so many different people. And I feel like me personally, I got into this not just because I love the art of it, but also I kind of see it as a responsibility now to represent, to show a different side of Asian men, because I can only play myself. I got one face, but to portray characters that look like me in a good light, or just in a three-dimensional light, right? Because there's just such a sore lack of AAPI characters, kind of just in general. They just recently released a study. I think the social media handle is The Inclusionists, along with Nancy Wong Yun, of kind of the statistics over the past almost decade of AAPI representation in Hollywood, and it's very lacking. But yeah, the reason for doing it though is this kind of subconscious filling in of just how people see us, and the ultimate goal is just so that we can all see each other as humans, right? Because it's not just about AAPI; it's about everyone. I grew up going to an international school where everyone in my classes and around me were just people from so many different ethnicities and cultures that to me it felt like just this kind of perfect, almost utopia of like, we treated each other as humans, right? If someone is a really sketchy person, we don't blame that on their skin color or their culture and stuff. They're just like, okay, this person is just a weird person. I don't want to hang out with them. They like stole something from me or whatever. There's this person, oh, they're so amazing. And it's not because of their skin color or culture. It's just because they're a really good person. And I feel like I want to bring that and kind of leave that as a message, I guess, for just that I think really need to just start treating people as people, without relying on, and I think that this, because of a lack of representation, people rely on the crutch of stereotypes because they don't know about people they haven't seen or heard about before. So yeah.
Thank you. And like I said earlier, if you ever watched any of James Tang in Bosch or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or this film called Innocence?
Trade of Innocence about human trafficking, you'll see what I mean. He is very talented, and he's very natural, and he plays different cross-cultural roles very, very well. Very believable and just very natural. I can't say enough. Irwin, do you want to talk about the implications? You know a lot of Asian American history in Texas, and we need further discussions about the different different significant events in Asian American history in Texas.
So hopefully we as AAPIs for Justice in San Antonio can begin to organize that. But do you have any parting words for the audience today about the implications of what being the author of all these different books, from your perspective of what that we haven't had time to talk about all today? What are the implications of of Asian American history in Texas, and maybe our responsibilities?
With the recent spate of anti-Asian attacks, I'm reminded of some areas of expertise that I have. One is in anti-Asian violence, which I wrote a 200-page thesis on in the 1990s in graduate school, and in crime in general. I was a therapist for criminals, solely criminals, for a number of years, and I have a lot of insight into how crime works and the history of crime against Asians in Texas and the United States. And so I want to remind people that the Asian shop owner is just a giant bullseye for gang members and other criminals. I mean, it's like, they call convenience stores the ATM for people who are addicted to drugs or gang members and so forth. In the year 2000, for instance, and Asians tend to concentrate in areas where they are in danger of violence. Massage therapists are in great danger of being sexually assaulted every day that they work. The convenience store owner, that business is dominated by South Asians. In Texas, it's also included the Vietnamese and other Southeast Asians. Used to be more Koreans. Traditionally, it was Chinese. And taxi drivers and so on and so forth. Small business owners are at high risk of being targeted for crimes. Now, are these racist crimes? Not explicitly, and that's why they're not publicized more. That's why you don't hear every time some Korean got shot and killed in LA, and it happens all the time in the 1990s in LA. That wasn't news. That was just breakfast, right? So this stuff, I think we need to remind ourselves that this is real. This is happening a lot. In San Antonio, there was a controversy back in the 90s, and I think it was 90s and early 2000s, where the Asian Americans were just sick of it. They were like, we need to make this stop happening. In Houston in 2000, there were 11 Asians shot to death just in convenience stores in a 6-month period. So I want to remind people that the Asian shop owner, they're working their asses off, getting up way early in the morning, putting themselves at risk all the time, suffering abuse from customers, people coming in and just calling them names, or just, shoplifting and just, like throwing it in their faces, like, haha, look, I'm taking all your shit, and it's terrible. It's terrible suffering. But a lot of times that's the only living that they know. And we need to remember them and ask them, what help do they need? And a lot of the number one problem is crime. And we need to find out, how can we help these people prevent themselves from getting shot? And how can a society keep these people safe? And I'm sorry that one of the ways is making sure that the criminal justice system works the way it should be. One of the reasons why so many Asians have been attacked recently in New York is because there's very little punishment for it. There has been, and in Texas, I saw one case where some dude pushed an old lady to the ground, and he was looking at up to 50 years in prison. Whereas in New York City, that the man who stomped on that Filipino woman's head over and over again, he had just gotten out of prison for killing his own mother. He only spent 17 years in prison for killing his own mother. And then he immediately, like within a year or two, is attacking people on the street for no reason. So it's these really hard issues. I don't want people to spend time in jail, but if they're not ready to come out, and I used to counsel these people. we used to get them out of prison quicker because they were in our counseling program. So I know what's going on. If they're not ready, then we need to look at that seriously. So thanks.
Thank you for bringing up the mental health aspect of it, because where mental health and race sort of plays together. I know that there's now recently forming more voices of how mental health has traditionally been for upper class and white cultures, at least in the U.S. And so that'd be interesting to see if that were to change, how that could affect the mental health of, Black, Asian, indigenous populations and other people of color. So that would be an interesting dialogue to have as well in the future. But thank you for sharing that, Irwin. Mayly, when you were talking about upward mobility and the skills needed to be an entrepreneur, a lot of those skills can actually transfer over to any industry, any job, because you learn to be so disciplined, you learn to be very organized, you learn how to time manage, you learn how to manage people, you learn how to be a people person. So even for the people that don't necessarily see themselves as an entrepreneur, I believe a lot of what you have to share can be helpful to even the social entrepreneur, the social worker, and anyone that just wants to monetize what they do. Like for me, I'm an MSW, and I sometimes end up working from the passion of my heart, and then later back, I look back and say, well, why didn't I just monetize that? And so coming from your journey as one of the younger generation of, the legacy of the Donut King, and forming your own, adding another dimension to that empire. What are the implications as being that person, and what do you have to share to the rest of the Asian American community?
I mean, yeah, it's like every person here who lives in America is going to have a different experience. But I think, again, something that I highlight in my podcast is I love talking about these golden nuggets that anybody in any industry can share and most likely can apply to what you have to do. And what I want to share is, we are all role models for how somebody can perceive another Asian American to be. So when people ask me what they can do, I tell them to break every stereotype that anybody has about an Asian person and to show them that we're all human out here. Just like James said, there's just this lack of understanding of humanity, and that, like I said before, the American dream is alive and well. It's really just, it comes from within, it comes from your mindset of how you think about yourself, how you perceive others. And, I think that working in a donut shop since I was a tiny, tiny little girl, it taught me a lot of things about business, a lot of things about people. And, for me, my takeaways are, build relationships with your community. Your community is everything. Document your parents' journey, because if you have kids in the future and they ask you, hey, where did great grandma do? You want to have an answer for them. And we don't have that much time left with our elders and to respect them. And number 3, it's just appreciate the things that your parents and your ancestors did so that, you could have this life here now. And it's not too late. We now, I have a little sister who is 11 years old. So she's 20 years younger than me. And how I feel about it is she has Google. You have Google to tell you everything and anything you need to know. Now it really just comes from within. So that's what I wanted to share with everybody.
Thank you for sharing that. There was the comment from someone I wanted to share. And if anyone listening, if they have any questions for any of the panel speakers, please do list them down in the comment section. There's one comment that says, prestigious universities and nonprofit organizations are rewarding people with scholarships, fellowships and awards for demonstrating scalable compassion, like the Knight Hennessy Scholars Program at Stanford University and the MacArthur Fellowship from MacArthur Foundation. The U.S. National Science Foundation Graduate Student Fellowship rewards applicants for improving inclusive diversity and equity in science and engineering. I believe he's just talking about different opportunities for funding different efforts for diversity. And so, and I think that's related to what everyone in this panel is doing. And again, like I said earlier, it's just really been exciting to have you all, gathered together here from different industries. Irwin from the academic and teaching and historical industry, James from the entertainment and Hollywood, and Mayly from the, you're like queen, like I want to call you donut queen, from that industry as an entrepreneur, and just being that role model, all of you being role models in each your own right and each your individual ways. And so I just want to say thank you to you all. I'm just checking if there's any questions from the audience. And I know that we'll be seeing more from you all. I know we'll be seeing more from James. He has everything from serious to funny reels to very geekdom, people who want to follow like in a geek following, cult following for his acting. He has that following, and even in the gaming industry. And Irwin, a lot of people want to highlight your work, especially now in the time of anti-Asian racism in Texas. Because we hardly ever hear about Texas. We hear about California, New York, Northern and Southern California, New York, and sometimes Chicago, but we hardly ever hear about Texas. And I just want to thank you for your work and putting Texas on the map of Asian American history. And I certainly hope that this will open up more discussions with you from the rest of the Texas community, especially in San Antonio and Austin, where you are, I believe. And Mayly, I also just want to thank you for the role model that you are, the voice that you are, because a lot of times we think of successful Asians in business as, the Asian model minority. And, there's different, conversations now, which is really healthy, of like what's wrong with the word minority, what's wrong with the word AAPI. And I think that's reflective of where we are as an Asian American community, where we're no longer just attaching to one, but we're actually having critical discussions. Well, what do we call ourselves? Are we AAPI? Is that good enough? How about Asian American, Native Hawaii? There's all these conversations. How do we represent South Asian enough? So we're at a healthy place as an Asian American community where we're having these critical discussions that we haven't had before. And mainly, you're a successful entrepreneur, yet you're not exactly just a model minority in terms of the model minority negative characteristic of being the model minority that is successful and stays away from showing any solidarity for, Black lives, or, showing support for Palestinians. We're entering that new phase in Asian American identity where we can be successful and make our own way, and not just be narrowed down to jobs where we can be hired or fired. And we can be a voice for empowerment and solidarity with other Black and Indigenous and other people of color. And so, and you all play a big role in this new phase of Asian American identity and Asian American discussions, And I just want to say I'm really impressed by you all. I'm very amazed by you all. And I just want to encourage everyone else to follow all of them, to follow James. And James, he has a website called James the Tang, and the Donut Princess. I believe you're on Instagram and probably Twitter and all that with that same hashtag?
Yeah, I'm all over social. So the best is Instagram at Mayly Tao. That's my name right there. And then donutprincessla.com and dksdonuts.com if you guys want some yummy donuts.
And who hates donuts, right? And James, do you have any social media that you want, any tags or that you
Same
want
thing
to?
all across the board. James the Tang.
James the Tang.
Twitter,
And
Instagram, Facebook, Twitch.
And Irwin Tang. Oh, sorry. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitch also, right?
Yeah. Twitch as well.
And Irwin, do you have any way for people to contact you?
Yeah, they can email me at irwinbooks@gmail.com, IRWINBOOKS@gmail. The Asian Texans history book, the official second edition, which was published, I think, in 2019 or 2020. You can buy it online at Amazon.com. I encourage you to buy the newest edition rather than the 2008 edition because I have a lot of new work and then a lot of new photographs in the new edition. So yeah, it's on sale right now. It's really cheap. I'm selling it at cost. Amazon's really angry at me. So yeah.
This is the older edition. So I'm gonna go look at that right now. But yes, it's so valuable. Both books are very valuable. But yes, I do look forward to the newer edition. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for the audience. Let me see if there's any more. We got a lot of thank yous.
Where are the questions?
They are in the comment section to the
No,
right.
I mean, I'm asking like the audience. Why aren't you asking any questions?
A lot of our audience actually they tune in after the event. Some of them, but a lot of people are saying that they've learned a lot. Like it's very informative.
Yeah, if it's for
Come on,
TCKs,
Asians,
I'm sure there's a
you
lot
got
of
to
time
stand up and
zones.
speak. Don't be scared. I know this is the age of self-censorship, but you really got to speak up and not be scared.
Yes, and about censorship, I do want to just mention one book because a lot of what we talked about, there's sometimes that we talk about these in social media spaces, and then some people say, well, you're just calling people out, like the cancel culture. But there's another book I want to mention, and it's called, it's by Adrienne Marie Brown, and it's called We Will Not Cancel Us, that talks about that cancel culture. And so read these books, and for anyone who hosts book reading clubs, more power to you. We hope that we interact with you and maybe get you also on a panel one day. And I do want to end with a very empowering line, and it's from the Linda Lindas, a band of teenagers in I believe based in California, or at least they had a recent concert in the Los Angeles Public Library. And it's their line from the book, from their song about racist, sexist boys. You say mean stuff. You close your mind to things you don't like. You turn away from what you don't want to see. Racist, sexist boy. You are a racist, sexist boy. And you have racist, sexist toys. Racist, sexist joys. We rebuild what you destroy. And I just want to give a shout out to everyone out there who is rebuilding what is destroyed by the destructive force of racism. Because each of our panelists today are role models of that in their own industries. And I just hope that this panel, this time that we've shared together, will help you be inspired to continue and carry on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara.
Much.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.